I certainly picked an interesting time to watch Tick Tick Boom. The protagonist, this is based on a true story, I'll talk about that in a moment, but our protagonist is just about to turn 30 and is navigating through life and his passions as a theatre composer. I turned 30 in just over a week. So for me, the emotional aspect of being at that stage in your life and not feeling accomplished enough definitely resonated with me. So I'm kind of glad that I watched this now, right when the emotions are exactly what I'm feeling. So with that in mind, if you are nearing, say, a certain age, a certain milestone, perfect time to watch it. I think you will relate to some aspects of it. With regards to the rest of it, there are a lot of things in this that I could discuss, but I'm not going to give spoilers. But what I do need to say is that my opinion is coming from a different place to a lot of people. A lot of people have watched this. I didn't read reviews before watching it, but I did obviously after the fact. I had a look online to see um, if my opinions were shared or not, and some of them were, some of them not, because my view is coming from somebody who has never seen Rent, who hadn't heard the name Jonathan Larson, our protagonist of this biopic, and who hadn't actually heard of this film. Despite the fact I like Lin-Manuel Miranda's music, despite the fact I like Vanessa Hudgens, I hadn't heard of it until I was randomly scrolling through Netflix. It didn't even recommend it to me despite my love of musicals. So it's a little bit awkward how I just never heard of this, and maybe that's my fault. But I am not coming from my views are not coming from I'm going to try this again. My views are not coming from a perspective of somebody who knew anything about this, who had any expectations, who has even seen Rent. Although I promise, Rent is on my radar, and I will be watching it as soon as possible. This is obviously autobiographical about Jonathan Larson, who, as I said, was approaching 30, didn't feel like he was in a place in his life where he could consider himself successful. And then one thing leads to another, and he encounters Stephen Sondheim, which in itself is would have been a dream come true. Stephen Sondheim is played by Bradley Whitford, very timely appearance of that name, unfortunately, and suddenly his life begins to change. And I will, at the very end of this, I will spoil the ending, because I need to kind of talk about that and why this story is so important. Otherwise, like me, to begin with, you may have been thinking, well, why is this particular person important? Why does this particular name warrant a biopic or an autobiographical musical as opposed to, say, any other composer or playwright? And I will talk about that at the end. The narrative also touches on various other things that were happening. This is set in the beginning of the 90s, and it talks a lot about the HIV crisis and how a lot of young men in particular were being affected by this and what was being done about it, or perhaps the lack thereof. That aspect of it I thought was particularly interesting, and again, not something that I had expected. I will say it's tasteful. If you're maybe not the biggest musical fan, I can confirm that they don't just start discussing these serious topics and then spring into song and dance. The songs are tastefully woven throughout, and most of the songs are, what's the word I'm looking for? They're actually part of the narrative. So, Larson is perhaps teaching a class and they're singing. It's not like unbelievable flash mobs or whatever. It's a lot more realistic, and so if you're kind of not a fan of the unbelievable side of musicals, that's something that I think you'll be able to get on board with quite well. With regards to the songs, just while I'm talking about them, nothing stood out to me as being amazing. None of the songs left an impression on me, partly because it's not my kind of music. There are various different kinds of musicals. One of the reasons I haven't seen Rent is that of the few songs that I've heard, they didn't really appeal to me. But, when it's in context, that may be slightly different and something that I will obviously talk about when I get around to watching it. But the songs in this one didn't really leave that much of an impression on me, but I know the songs are quite powerful. There is a lot of love for the music, I'm not sure how many of the songs were 100% from Larson, or if they've been changed quite a bit for this. I assume it's maybe a mixture of the two. Feel free to correct me either way. So in terms of, do I feel like I know this individual better? Absolutely, yes. As I said, I'd never heard of him. Having watched this, I now feel like I can at least tell you a little bit about who he was, what he stood for, what his life was like. Do I feel like it's a good musical? Personally, I didn't like the style of music, but in terms of the way the music is kind of woven throughout, the way it transitions from speech to singing works really well. The choreography is not the most abundant, but it's there and it's pretty decent. What I don't like about this is some of the narrative style where Larson is talking to an audience and then it obviously cuts to filmed scenes, if you like. But I do have to say Andrew Garfield gave a great performance. Not that I have anything to compare it on, since I didn't have an impression of Jonathan Larson in my head already, but just based on the performance and the source material being the film alone, I enjoyed his performance. Vanessa Hudgens was very good as well, not in it as much as I would have liked. The whole cast was pretty good. I don't really have any complaints about it, apart from the music not appealing to me, but that's not, the music wasn't bad, the composition wasn't bad, the songs fit in at the right times. So, why is this particularly important? So this is obviously a spoiler, I'm about to say how it ends, but if you are aware of Jonathan Larson, I'm pretty sure you'll be aware of this. So he dies the day. Well, some sources say he died the night before, and some sources say he died the day of because of when his body was found. But he died the day of the opening night of Rent, and he never got to enjoy that success. So it's quite emotional when you kind of reach the end of his story, because it starts off with him saying he's about to turn 30. He doesn't feel accomplished in ways that he hoped, and then you get to follow this kind of whirlwind journey as his career begins to go somewhere and he gets these opportunities, and he's finally about to taste that success with a production that we know goes on for, oh goodness, many, many years. I can't remember how long Rent ran for on Broadway, but it was a very long time. And then his life is snatched away from him right at the very second that he's about to begin enjoying that and can finally feel that success that he as an artist has craved. And that's, wow, I'm getting a little bit emotional. Speaking as an artist, that's quite harsh. I'm sure it's not the first time it's happened, but when you work so hard on something, whether it's a play, a book, a film, you do it not for the praise, but for that sense, that gratification, that sense of satisfaction, of completion as well, to see it to the end. And I guess seeing Rent to the end would have been seeing it finally performed for an audience. And it was taken away at the last second. And I think that resonates with every artist, and that's one of the reasons why I liked this, even though I didn't know who he was beforehand, because I think it's something that will affect most people, certainly artists, but also just people in if you've got any kind of passion for anything in life. I think if you imagine this happening to you and something you've worked hard at, it's moving, it's effective. So for me, it's not perfect. I don't think it's the most amazing film in the world. I don't think the music was overly spectacular for me, but again, nothing wrong with the actual composition. But it is emotional. If you haven't seen it and it sounds like your kind of thing, definitely check it out. It's moving. You'll learn a lot about Jonathan Larson. You'll learn a lot about the industry at the time. I don't really think theatre has changed too much over the last few decades. Maybe in terms of employing women a little bit, but generally the emotions that you go through and the processes are still very much, very, very similar. Tick, Tick, Boom may not have been on my radar, and then somehow it was. And I'm really glad of that, because although I don't think it's perfect, it's moving and emotional and definitely worth watching.